My sister stayed friends with my cheating ex-wife, so I cut ties with her. Now she's broke, living with our parents, and they're pressuring me to help her. Hi, I'm a 36-year-old man, and 5 years ago, I went through a messy divorce from my ex-wife, Martha, 34F. We'd been together for nearly 6 years, married for 2, and on the surface, everything seemed perfect. But behind the scenes, our relationship was falling apart. The first signs of trouble appeared during our second year of marriage. Martha started staying late at work more frequently, often saying she was too busy to talk or spend time together. I didn't think much of it at first. She worked in a high-pressure environment, and I assumed it was just the nature of her job. But over time, her behavior became harder to ignore. She was glued to her phone, guarding it like it contained state secrets. Texts would come in at all hours, and if I asked who it was, her answers were vague or dismissive. I started noticing how detached she was, emotionally and physically. Our conversations became superficial, and her affection felt forced. I thought maybe she was just stressed and tried to be supportive, but a gnawing feeling told me something was wrong. On our 2-year anniversary, we went out for dinner at her favorite restaurant. I'd hoped it would rekindle some of the warmth between us, but she was distant the whole night, constantly checking her phone under the table. I knew then that my suspicions weren't baseless. That night, after we got home, she dropped the bombshell. She'd been having an affair with a coworker for months. She said she felt guilty and wanted to confess so we could work on our marriage. She claimed she loved me and didn't want to lose me. But her words felt hollow. All I could think about was how she'd betrayed me and lied to my face for months. I couldn't trust her anymore. For me, the marriage was over. I told her to pack her things and leave. Within weeks, we'd filed for divorce. I kept the house, but the emotional toll was devastating. To make matters worse, as soon as the divorce was finalized, she married the coworker she'd been cheating with. They moved to Philadelphia, and I haven't spoken to or seen her since. The divorce was one of the darkest periods of my life. I spent months questioning myself, wondering if I'd missed red flags or done something to drive her away. Therapy helped me process the betrayal and rebuild my confidence. Slowly, I started to move on. But just when I thought I was putting it all behind me, another betrayal blindsided me, this time from someone I never expected. My younger sister, Na, 34F, had been close friends with Martha since college. They'd been part of the same social circle, which is how I met Martha in the first place. Despite their friendship, I assumed Na would support me during the divorce. After all, I was her brother, and Martha had betrayed me. But when I told my family about the infidelity, I was shocked to learn that Na already knew. Martha had confided in her before telling me. Worse, Na tried to convince me to forgive Martha and work on the marriage. She said Martha was truly sorry and deserved a second chance. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own sister was siding with the woman who had destroyed my marriage. I told Na I couldn't stay with Martha, no matter how sorry she claimed to be. I also made it clear that I was deeply hurt by her decision to continue being friends with Martha. I'd expected Na to cut ties with her out of loyalty to me, but she refused. Na insisted that her friendship with Martha was separate from my marriage and that it wasn't fair for me to ask her to take sides. She said she wanted to remain neutral and maintain a relationship with both of us. To me, her stance felt like a betrayal. Family should come first. I told her she had to choose, either continue her friendship with Martha or maintain her relationship with me. I thought the choice was obvious, but to my shock, Na chose Martha. She called me petty and immature for making her choose in the first place. The final blow came when Na attended Martha's second wedding to her affair partner. Knowing she was there, celebrating the union of my ex-wife and the man she'd cheated on me with, was too much. That was the point of no return for me. I cut Na out of my life completely. 5 years have passed since that decision. My parents have tried repeatedly to mend things between us, but I've held firm. At family gatherings, Na and I act like strangers. We don't speak or acknowledge each other. Sometimes I wonder if she regrets her choice, but her actions suggest otherwise. During these 5 years, I've focused on rebuilding my life. I've thrown myself into my career, made new friends, and created a life I'm proud of. But despite my best efforts to move on, my parents continue to bring up Na whenever we talk. A couple of years ago, they told me Na had started her own graphic design business with some friends. Before that, she'd been freelancing and seemed to be doing well. They said her business was doing decently, and I thought that was good for her. Then, a few days ago, I got an unexpected call from my parents. They told me Na was in trouble and needed help. Apparently, her business hadn't been doing as well as she'd let on. She'd racked up a significant amount of debt and was struggling to stay afloat. Things had gotten so bad that she'd been evicted from her apartment after falling behind on rent for 6 months. For now, she was staying with her boyfriend, but it wasn't a long-term solution. He shared his apartment with a roommate, and they'd only agreed to let her stay for 2 weeks. Her time was almost up. My parents said they'd offered to let Na move back in with them, but she refused, saying it would be humiliating. They also offered her financial support, but she declined that too. Now, they were turning to me, asking if I could let her stay with me temporarily or help her financially. I was stunned. After everything that had happened, they really expected me to step in and help? I was taken aback by the call from my parents. It had been years since Na and I had spoken, and now they expected me to step in and save the day? I didn't respond immediately. My initial reaction was disbelief, followed by anger. I told my parents it wasn't my responsibility to help Na. She'd made her choices, and so had I. After everything she'd done, choosing Martha, celebrating her second wedding, and cutting me out of her life, why should I be the one to bail her out? My parents didn't take my refusal well. They started guilt-tripping me, saying Na was in a terrible situation and had no one else to turn to. They argued that as her brother, I had a moral obligation to help her. She's your sister, my mom said. Family helps family. I reminded them that Na hadn't cared about family loyalty when she chose Martha over me. If family was so important, why hadn't she supported me during the divorce? My parents didn't have an answer to that. Instead, they accused me of being petty and letting my ego get in the way. It wasn't about ego, it was about boundaries. For years, Na had made it clear that I wasn't a priority in her life. She chose Martha's friendship over our sibling relationship, and I'd accepted that. I wasn't holding a grudge, I was simply respecting the distance she'd created. But my parents wouldn't let it go. They said I was being selfish and heartless for refusing to help when Na was at her lowest. My mom even went so far as to say my selfishness was probably why my marriage with Martha had failed. That comment cut deep. I couldn't believe my own mother would say something so cruel. I reminded her that the marriage had ended because Martha cheated on me, not because of anything I did. But the damage was done. Her words stung, and I realized this wasn't a conversation worth continuing. I told my parents I was done talking about Na and hung up. After that call, I blocked their numbers. For a few days, things were quiet. I thought my parents had finally accepted my decision, but I was wrong. One evening, I came home from work to find them waiting outside my house. I was exhausted after a long day and had no patience for their antics. I told them to leave, but they refused. They said they just wanted to talk, but I knew better. They weren't here for a conversation, they were here to pressure me into helping Na. I told them I wasn't interested and asked them to leave again. When they still refused, I threatened to call the cops. They didn't believe me, so I followed through. I called the police and reported them for trespassing. The cops arrived and escorted my parents off my property. They looked shocked and betrayed, but I didn't care. I'd given them plenty of chances to respect my boundaries, and they'd ignored every one of them. After that incident, I decided to consult a lawyer. The situation was escalating, and I needed to protect myself. My lawyer recommended filing for a restraining order, and I agreed. Things got worse after I called the cops. I started receiving phone calls and text messages from unknown numbers. At first, I answered a few, thinking they might be work-related, but the person on the other end would hang up as soon as I said hello. Then the text messages started. They were cruel and accusatory, calling me selfish, ungrateful, and a terrible son and brother. Some of the messages were riddled with insults, while others tried to guilt me into helping Na. I knew my parents were behind it. They'd probably convinced some of their friends or relatives to join in the harassment campaign. I blocked every number that contacted me, but the calls and messages kept coming from new numbers. It was exhausting and invasive. I couldn't believe my own parents would stoop to this level. Eventually, I filed for the restraining order. I couldn't allow them to disrupt my life like this any longer. The legal process wasn't easy. My parents tried to argue that their actions didn't warrant a restraining order, but the evidence was on my side. I had call logs, text messages, and even footage from my doorbell camera showing them on my property after being told to leave. After weeks of back and forth, the court granted the restraining order. My parents were no longer allowed to contact me or come near my home. It was a relief, but it was also bittersweet. I never imagined things would get to this point. Not long after the restraining order was issued, I received a message from Na. I hadn't blocked her because, frankly, I didn't think she'd ever contact me. But now, here she was, accusing me of being ungrateful for taking legal action against our parents. She said they'd done so much for us growing up and that I owed it to them to be more understanding. She painted me as the villain, someone who had turned his back on his family out of spite. Her message made my blood boil. It was easy for her to defend them, they were bending over backward to help her, after all. I told her as much, pointing out that my parents' harassment stemmed from their obsession with fixing her problems. She denied ever asking for their help, or mine. She claimed she didn't need me or anyone else to bail her out. That's when I told her everything. I explained how our parents had been hounding me for weeks, begging me to let her move in or give her money. I told her about the harassment, the phone calls, the messages, and the fact that they'd shown up at my house uninvited. She seemed genuinely shocked. She had no idea our parents had been going to such lengths on her behalf. She ended the conversation abruptly, saying she needed time to process everything. After my conversation with Na, things took an unexpected turn. A few days later, I heard from some relatives that Na had moved out of our parents' house. Apparently, she'd confronted them about their behavior after learning how far they'd gone in their efforts to involve me. The confrontation didn't go well. Na was furious that they'd implied she was incapable of solving her own problems. From what I was told, my parents tried to justify their actions by saying they were only trying to help. But Na saw it as an attack on her independence and accused them of making things worse by dragging me into the situation. Their fight escalated to the point where Na decided she couldn't stay with them any longer. She packed her things and moved in with a friend. As news of the conflict spread through our extended family, opinions became divided. Some relatives sided with my parents, believing I was wrong for refusing to help Na. They argued that family should always come first, regardless of past grievances. Others supported me. Once they heard the full story, including how Na had chosen Martha over me and how my parents had harassed me, they understood why I'd drawn such firm boundaries. I decided to share my side of the story with anyone willing to listen. I wanted to set the record straight and make it clear that I wasn't being selfish, I was protecting myself. To my surprise, most of the family came around to my perspective. My parents, on the other hand, found themselves increasingly isolated. Their attempts to garner sympathy backfired as more people learned about their behavior. It seemed they'd underestimated how much their actions would alienate others. Despite the fallout with our parents, Na and I didn't reconcile. She didn't reach out again after our last conversation, and I didn't feel the need to initiate contact either. Some relatives suggested this might be an opportunity for us to mend our relationship, but I wasn't convinced. Na had never acknowledged how deeply her actions had hurt me. She never apologized for siding with Martha or attending her wedding. Without that acknowledgement, I couldn't see a path forward for us. For me, it wasn't about holding a grudge, it was about trust. Na had made it clear where her priorities lay, and I'd adjusted my expectations accordingly. This entire ordeal, my divorce, the estrangement from Na, and the fallout with my parents, has taught me a lot about boundaries and self-respect. For years, I let myself feel guilty for cutting people out of my life, even when their behavior was toxic. But I've come to realize that protecting my peace isn't selfish, it's necessary. My parents' harassment was a painful reminder that some people will go to great lengths to impose their will on others, even at the expense of their relationships. Their actions have only solidified my decision to keep my distance. As for Na, I've accepted that our relationship may never be repaired. And that's okay. Not every relationship is meant to last, even those bound by blood. Life has been quieter since I got the restraining order. My parents can no longer contact me, and the phone calls and messages have stopped. I've been able to focus on my career, my friends, and my personal growth without the constant stress of family drama. I've also been reflecting on what I want my future to look like. For a long time, I let the pain of my divorce and the fallout with my family define me. But I'm ready to move past that. I'm ready to live a life that's defined by joy, fulfillment, and meaningful relationships. I don't know what the future holds for my family. Maybe one day, Na will reach out with an apology, or my parents will realize how their actions have affected me. But I'm not holding my breath. For now, I'm focused on living well and letting go of the past. Final thoughts. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that we have the right to choose who we allow into our lives. Family connections don't give anyone a free pass to mistreat or manipulate us. I've chosen to prioritize my well-being, and I don't regret it. The road hasn't been easy, but it's been worth it. I've built a life I'm proud of, surrounded by people who respect and value me. To anyone reading this who's struggling with toxic family dynamics, I hope my story serves as a reminder that it's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to walk away from relationships that bring more pain than joy. Life is too short to spend it surrounded by people who don't have your best interests at heart. Thank you for watching the video. Subscribe and turn on notifications to be the first to have radish and real stories with you. Have a great day.